Thank you very much. It's very much my pleasure to be here today to present some of the research that the Agricultural Research Service is doing related to AMR, and I get to give this talk on behalf of myself as well as Dr. Kim Cook, who's in the back, who's also the National Program Leader for Food Safety and who helps co-lead some of the efforts related to AMR. So because I'm from the government, I have to start with an org chart, but many people I don't think are very familiar with ARS. We are the Agricultural Research Service, so we are the intramural research arm for USDA. So we are located under the Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics. And our sister organization, the extramural research arm, is NIFA, or the National Institutes for Food and Agriculture, who some people are familiar with because they provide funding to many of the ag colleges for research grants. At the ARS, we work very closely with APHIS as well as FSIS, and the three agencies are actually the co-chairs for the USDA One Health Working Group, which are the USDA representatives to the PACCARB. So we work very closely together on all things related to AMR. So just a broad overview of ARS. We have over 90 different locations across the country with 4 overseas laboratories. In FY18, our budget was around $1.2 billion, but we like to say that covers everything from apples to zucchini. So we have a very large research portfolio that encompasses about 700 research projects between 16 national programs. And so of those 700 projects, about 25 of them are related to AMR, and FY17 funding was about $21.5 million, and we split it based on what's related to food safety, what is AMR that's not related to food safety, and then on alternatives. And so that's how the funding breaks out for that. Within ARS, we divide the national programs into 4 national program areas. That's animal production and protection, crop production and protection, natural resources and sustainable ag systems, and then nutrition, food safety, and quality. And so under those 4 areas, there are the 16 national programs. The ones highlighted, food safety, soil and air, food animal production, and animal health are all of the ones that have AMR written into their action plan. So those are the priorities that are set forth for the research. So ARS's mission overall is to deliver scientific solutions to national and global agricultural challenges. And our role in AMR research is to contribute solution-oriented, hypothesis-driven research for the benefit of agriculture and to ensure a safe and secure food supply. And so we perform basic and applied research in support of that mission. And I think, as we've talked about and as we all know, AMR in agriculture is a very complex issue. And so ARS has research that touches on many of those issues when you look at the continuum. But areas in which we don't do research are related to surveillance, antimicrobial stewardship, and also anything related to pet animals, as we are very livestock focused, as we are charged with protecting the food supply. And so I think as was alluded to a little bit before, USDA developed its own antimicrobial resistance action plan in 2014. And the goal of this was for, at the department level, to coordinate what each agency would be doing as it relates to AMR. And this action plan was actually rolled into the PACCARB action plan, national action plan in 2015. And so there were 3 objectives underneath the USDA AMR action plan. And ARS, while not the main agency for each of these objectives, performs research that informs each of these objectives. And I'm going to provide research highlights under these objectives moving forward. So the first objective under the AMR action plan was to determine and model purposes and impacts of antibiotic use in food-producing animals. So one of the laboratories that does a lot of this work is the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. And they have, they're one of our largest research locations, and they have the ability to do kind of controlled feedlot style trials. And so they do a lot of work at looking at some of these antibiotic treatments in large cohorts of animals. And so they've done a 5-day feed of prophylactic CTC to see the impacts on levels of antibiotic-resistant bacteria and antibiotic resistance genes, and found no long-term impacts. They've also looked at conventionally raised cattle as well as cattle raised without antibiotics, and looked at the antibiotic resistance levels and found that they were fairly similar between the lots of cattle, with slight elevations in the conventionally raised cattle. Another group that's doing this in poultry is at the U.S. National Poultry Research Center in Athens, Georgia, and so they're looking at pastured poultry management systems and finding that even without antibiotics, they're finding MDR pathogens using NARMS panels. And so they're collaborating with academia to look at what other risk factors there might be on the farm, so other types of animals on the farm or concentrations of the metals in feces and in soils, and then also trying to geospatially and temporally map this across 11 different farms over 4 years. So I think kind of trying to take more of that holistic look. In support of objective number 2, monitoring antibiotic drug susceptibilities of selected bacterial organisms in food-producing animals, production environments, and meat and poultry, FSIS definitely plays more of a role in this, but we certainly perform research that informs that. One of these would be developing this technology called DART-QM, which is happening at the National Animal Disease Center in Ames, Iowa. And the goal behind this is to develop a high-throughput DNA sequencing method that simultaneously looks at resistance genes, mobile genetic elements, and phylogenetic markers, with the idea that you would be able to do large-scale monitoring of many different sample types, and then potentially use this to monitor the efficacy of different mitigation strategies over time. And this is being done in conjunction with Iowa State University through a USDA NIFA grant. Also at Athens, we have researchers who are working with the developing countries, such as Nigeria, Egypt, and Pakistan, to look at antibiotic resistance in different pathogens like E. coli, staph, Salmonella, and also looking at biocide resistance and developing panels to actually be able to monitor resistance to biocides. And then objective 3 is probably where ARS has the most research, and I've just picked a few to highlight, but this is to identify feasible management practices, alternatives to antibiotics, and other mitigation strategies to reduce AMR in food-producing animals and their environments. So the Animal Health Program, which is actually my national program, we spent a large thrust of our research is in vaccine and therapeutic development for priority production diseases, so as to mitigate not having to use antibiotics. So this year, one of our researchers recently transferred a vaccine for strep suis that's showing it shows shows that it could be cross-protective against several different strains. Our natural products group actually has found a novel antibiotic called these leomycins that are specific for strep bacteria, and they've tested it and found that all strains of strep suis tested were susceptible, and they're also looking at it now as a possible mastitis treatment. In Beltsville, Maryland, we have scientists working on developing vaccines for Eimeria for poultry. And then also our group in Iowa is looking at mastitis and looking at differences in E. coli that cause persistent versus transient infections, as well as looking at some like the pegylated GCSF or granulocyte colony stimulating factor, to look at how that helps in the treatment of mastitis or prevention of mastitis. And then also, too, our national program 212, the Soil and Air Program, is doing quite a bit looking at environmental AMR mitigation strategies, so looking at things like wood chip bioreactors or hydrothermal carbonization or composting or anaerobic digesters to look at ways to treat manure or other animal products to decrease kind of the fate and transport of antibiotic drugs as well as antibiotic-resistant bacteria into the environment. And so as I close, I just wanted to bring awareness to the ARS Grand Challenge process, which ARS is in the process of changing, but it's happening in response to this National Academy's report looking at what scientific breakthroughs are needed to really advance food and agriculture research by 2030. And one of the biggest biggest recommendations that I think we've already talked about today is this need for transdisciplinary science and systems approaches and to break out of the silos. And so, and that you really have to have that approach in order to make great progress. And so ARS is now starting what's called the Grand Challenges Synergies, which is to try to bring scientists across ARS to answer some of these really big picture questions. And so Kim and I are really interested in hearing from you all and discussing with you all further, what are the research questions that an ARS AMR Grand Challenge question should address? What are the things that we might be uniquely suited to look at? And how can our research inform risk assessments and surveillance and antibiotic stewardship activities, given that we don't really do research in those areas? And finally, how can ARS better work with academia and industry to address some of these challenges? So with that, I will close. This is all the contact information for all the national program leaders who have research related to AMR, but Kim and I are going to be here through the duration of the conference and really look forward to talking with you. Thank you.